Okay, today's lesson is on properties of equality. They are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But before we get started, I want to remind you of two things. The first thing I want to remind you of is make sure that you have multicolored pens, maybe a highlighter when you're taking notes. And then the second thing that I want to remind you of is when you are taking notes, wait for me to describe and explain the whole slide before you start writing stuff down. So listen and watch, and then pause the computer when I get to a breaking point, probably at the bottom of the slide, and then copy everything down. It'll help you as you learn and give you a better understanding. So let's get started. First, I want to review what an expression is. So the definition of an expression is a math phrase using numbers, variables, and signs or symbols. Remember that expressions are simplified or evaluated. And let's look at a couple of examples. In this example, 5x minus 3, we are given a variable expression. The variable is x. We notice that it is being multiplied by 5. So the 5 is called the coefficient because coefficients multiply with variables. And then the negative 3 over here, the subtracting 3, that is called the constant. This one is already simplified. It cannot be simplified. In the second one, this is a numerical expression because it only includes numbers. This one can be simplified, so 15 minus 3 would be 12, and you could simplify that one step further. So an equation is similar to an expression, and that's why I went over the definition, but it has an equal sign in it, okay? Equations are always solved. So let's look at a couple of examples. So 5x equals 10. The equal sign in this one is right in the middle, but it always separates the left side of the equation from the right side, and these two pieces are always equal to each other. In the second example, m plus 2 equals 10, notice that the equal sign is over here on the right side, but it is still the middle of the equation because what this says is m plus 2 is the same value as 10. So you would have to figure out what m is. So why don't you pause your computer and you can copy the definition down. If you have a vocab sheet where equation and expression are, you would copy them there. Okay, so when we are solving an equation, there's a goal. The goal is you want a single positive variable on one side of the equal sign and what it is equal to on the other side. I'll give you a couple of examples because those words might be a little bit confusing. You want your answer to look like this, where you have a variable that has a coefficient of 1 and it's positive, is equal to a number. So the equal sign always has to be in the middle between those two. Another example, we have negative 20 equals m. The difference between the second example here and the first example is that the variable is on the right side. The variable can be on the right side in this case, or on the left side in this case, and it would still be correct. It just has to have a coefficient of 1, a positive 1, right? No negative sign in front of it. A third example, these are called literal formulas. And we solved this literal formula for D. So D is equal to RT. And each one of these different letters stand for a word. So this one stands for distance is equal to rate times time. And that would allow you to plug some values in and figure some things out mathematically. Again, I want to reiterate, the equal sign is the middle of every equation, no matter where it is, because the left side is equal to the right side. Okay, the next part that we're talking about is inverse or opposite operations. So I have opposite here because that is the definition of inverse. So when we're looking at our operations, you have addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. If this is the operation, what is the inverse operation? Another way to ask that, what is the opposite operation? So what is the opposite of addition would be subtraction. What is the opposite of subtraction? Well, we just said it, addition. What is the opposite of multiplication? Division. And the opposite of division is multiplication. So why don't you pause your computer here and copy down those inverse operations. And now we're going to talk about the properties of equality. So the addition property of equality says that you add the same number to both sides of the equation. So let's get an example and see what it looks like. So if we have the example x minus 4 equals 9, the equal sign is the middle of our equation. On the left side, we have x minus 4. On the right side, we have 9. So we want to get our variable by itself, and we need to do the inverse, or the opposite of subtracting 4. Well, the inverse of subtracting 4 would be adding 4, and you add 4 to both sides. You do the exact same thing. Negative 4 plus 4 would give us 0, so they cancel out, and you get x equals 13. And this step in blue right here is the addition property of equality. It's just what you are doing in that equation. For the subtraction property of equality, it says subtract the same number from both sides of the equation. Again, I'll give you another example. In our second example, it looks very similar to the first one, except it's x plus 4 on the left side. And then you have your equal sign in the middle, and then you have your 9 on the right side. So to get x by itself, because that's the goal, we need to do the inverse of adding 4. So the inverse of adding 4 would be subtracting 4 from both sides. 4 minus 4 is 0, so they cancel out, and you get x is equal to 5. For the multiplication property of equality, it says you multiply the same number by both sides of the equation. So you would have to be multiplying. The inverse of multiplication is division. So we have our variable divided by 4. So m divided by 4 equals 9. The way we do the inverse of dividing by 4 would be multiplying by 4. And what happens here is they cancel out on the left side, because 4 times m is 4m, divided by 4 would be 1m, and that's why they cancel out. So m is equal to 9 times 4, which is 36. And then the last property of equality is division, and it says divide the same number by both sides of the equation. So again, we have this equation where it says 6m equals negative 18. When you have a coefficient, which is the 6, and a variable, m, next to each other, that tells you that they are multiplying. So the inverse operation, or the opposite operation of multiplying, would be dividing. And you always want to divide by whatever that coefficient is right there. So we're going to divide by 6. 6 divided by 6 would give us 1. So that would give us our 1m. And that equals negative 18. So negative 18 divided by 6 would be negative 3. So here is the property of equality. Division property, because you're dividing. Multiplication property, because you are multiplying the inverse of dividing. Here we subtracted because we did the inverse of adding 4, which is subtracting 4. And up here we did the inverse of subtracting 4, which is adding 4. So if you can understand or remember that the inverse is just the opposite, that will help you. Okay, let's do some practice. So we have 6 examples here that I'm going to have you complete on your own. One little hint. It says the sum of the answers for examples 1 through 3 is negative 2. So when you solve 1 and you solve 2 and you solve 3, what you should do is add their answers together, and it should equal negative 2. That will be the guide that will let you know whether you're on the right track. For 4 and 5 and 6, the sum of the answers for examples 4 through 6 is positive 7. So again, you would solve 4, then solve 5, then solve 6, and you should get 7. Okay, so that's the video for today. Go back and review